Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to continue our discussion on MKUltra and we're going to talk about subprojects 23 and 35, which actually dealt with cancer patients. And then we're also going to talk about subproject 45, which is on the K drug or the knockout drug. I want to give you a trigger warning. If you don't want to hear about experimentations done by these alphabet agencies on terminally ill patients, maybe this isn't the video for you. It's good to know though, for historical sake, so that we can make sure that these things never happen again. So if you're still here, let's get into it. In Georgetown, at Georgetown University, the CIA chose terminally ill patients, some with cancer, some with liver failure, terminal diabetes, to test a knockout drug. You heard that right. They chose these patients on whom to test a knockout drug. The purpose, the stated purpose, was to develop a, quote, knockout pill which can surreptitiously be administered in drinks, food, cigarettes, or as an aerosol to provide a, quote, maximum amnesia and to make it, quote, impossible for a man or woman to perform any physical activity whatsoever. These were the perfect patients for that. You have people in end stages of their disease at Georgetown who perhaps in the minds of some alphabet agencies had nothing left to live for, and that perhaps they were doing them a favor, testing these knockout drugs. The stated reason of which was to make something that they could knock it out somebody surreptitiously. That isn't something you're giving to a patient who has a terminal illness to ease them out of this life. You give it to them when they're conscious or unconscious, but with the knowledge of the doctors and the family members around and everybody being on the same page. This is obviously on its stated reasoning for something rather nefarious. The cover research, of course, guys, you always have to have a cover. You can't go to a family member and go, look, I'm from an alphabet agency. I see your wife over there is in the bed dying of cancer. You know, we've got this drug that we want to test on spies. That's who we really want to test it on, but we might test it on our citizens too. But you know what? We've got this drug, this knockout drug. We'd really like to test it. Can we test it on your wife, please? How high do you think that little scenario would fly? Not very high. So they have to have a cover. And the cover research and the story was that they were testing stress with cortisone and adrenaline on cancer patients, or that they were testing painkillers. So you think if you have a family member that's there caring for a loved one in their last days and moments, they wouldn't necessarily be so averse to giving them an experimental painkiller. But was that what they got? No! The search for this knockout drug, otherwise known as the K drug, because they have to make everything cute, so cute with a K, cost the CIA $531,960 with money channeled through the Geschichter Fund. So let's put little Dr. Geschichter's name back up here. The Geschichter Fund. It's spanning through 6 years from 1955 to 1961. Yeah. Let that sink in. 2 biochemists analyzed, quote, bodily fluids in a toxic state, focusing on toxic cerebral state centers in the patient. Cerebral. That means your head, doesn't it? The aim was to induce, quote, natural toxic psychoses. Not pain killing, not stress reduction. Psychosis. I don't want to get choked up, but do you want your last moments on the earth to be filled with psychosis? I don't think so. The cover explanation for the project was that the experiments were to evaluate other effects of the drug, such as anti-cancer, on cardiovascular effects. So they're coming to these folks and kind of giving them one last hope, when really they knew that that was not the case, that this was essentially a chemical weapon that they were going to be testing on their relatives, friends, and loved ones. Stansfield Turner, he was a former CIA director from 1977 to 1981, so he had 3 years to do his apology tour. Stansfield Turner wrote, quote, that painkillers for advanced cancer patients and tests on such patients were carried out, so he admitted it after the fact, but this research was not humanistic. They were searching for something to cause a maximum amnesia and to make someone immobile and induce natural toxic psychoses. This is all on the record after the fact. Again, which I want to say, all this agenda is over and above the concept of giving someone or creating a painkiller. Giving them natural toxic psychoses. This is what we, the government, our alphabet agencies, 70 years ago, were looking to do. They were looking to control people's behavior. They were looking to control their minds. They were looking to modify behavior by so many different ways, not just one, not just the LSD, not through the shock, not just the shock therapy, not just the ECT, not just every single thing I've mentioned in these videos and more to come, and in combination. They also thought, let's create some knockout drugs. Who best to test it on? These feeble, ill people in hospitals. And Georgetown was one of the recipients of this project. In addition to observing the patient's reactions once given the drugs, the scientists studied the vital fluids from the spinal cord and other organs from comatose and delirious patients who had been hospitalized for liver failure, cancer, uremia, etc. Let's let that sink in. What they're saying is not only did they give these people things to hopefully in their minds create this natural toxic psychosis, they were going to go and harvest vital fluids from their spinal cords and other organs from comatose patients and delirious patients. The patients were not dead yet. I know I'm being overly dramatic because it needs to be said. In some of these patients, they didn't wait to scavenge the body at autopsy for their projects. This is how horrendous things got, guys. They didn't always wait. The New York Times got a hold of this, and this is back in the day where you could generally trust the mainstream media to some extent, until we had a project under MKUltra that sought to allegedly put CIA agents in the mainstream media. And you can ask yourself if that stopped. Some people don't think so. But back then, in the initial stages, there were some good reporters at the New York Times that got their teeth into this juicy story and couldn't wait to report on it. Do you think people believed it right out of the gate? No. The New York Times reported, quote, in the patient, some vital organs other than the brain would have failed, causing them to pass from mental disorientation into delirium and coma. I just want to note this sounds like a horrible death, and it's a real true far cry from the painkiller the project purported to create, and they allegedly told people who were interested in what was being done to their loved one. In exchange for the subject's participation in these experiments, because sometimes when you're approaching someone, in this case, you got to have some compensation, you got to have exchange, and we're talking contract, right? We're going to talk about contract law now and talk about you got to have a little bit of a proper compensation and an exchange. And the good old Geschickter Fund, which was a CIA cutout agency, so Geschickter Fund, let's put that flag up here, allegedly paid the hospital expenses of certain persons suffering from incurable cancer. So now we have not just someone, an alphabet agency related doctor coming to a family member, loved one, whomever, maybe the patient themselves, and saying, hey, we've got something that maybe could work. It's painkiller, you're here in the hospital, you're in the late stages. We'll pay for your hospital bill. Ooh, now I've really sweetened the deal. Because some people maybe want to go out sober and with their faculties, and they don't want the painkillers. I mean, there are some folks that want to put their teeth into the wind and fight, and they don't want to go out comfortably numb. So that wouldn't have been an interest for them. But to say, hey, we'll pay your hospital bills, oh my Lord, you're going to have a lot more folks jumping on that, and maybe even some family members going, yeah, let's take that. Let's take that, June. You're going you're going out, you know. We'll give you a good painkiller, June. You're not going to have hallucinations when you have your hospital bills paid for, Aunt June. This is how this happened. Even the memorandum for the record of August 25th, 1955, you can find this on the CREFST website, stated the quote, "The project engineer authorized the contractor to pay hospital expenses of certain persons suffering from incurable cancer for the privilege of studying the effects of these chemicals during terminal illnesses." And I don't know if you watch any of my other videos, but the reason this is so cloaked in secrecy, so hard to figure out what happened, such a dang rabbit's hole, is because almost all the documents were shredded. So what was left was financial records, but sometimes in these kind of cases, the financial records can kind of give you a good clue, and then you can have those people subpoenaed, Dr. Geschichter questioned, and different people from, say, Georgetown questioned, and then little more tidbits come out, and then, oh my gosh. So under oath, Dr. Geschichter adamantly denied those payments. That's the bloody cheek some of these people have. You have the financial documents. You've got the Geschichter Fund. It's a cutout agency for the CIA, allegedly. Let's say allegedly. Let's sprinkle that through like salt and pepper. Allegedly. Come on, it was. He adamantly denied these payments, though there were physical records in the file, claiming that the records were inaccurate. Oh, okay, so 20 years later, somebody falsified those records? Yeah, okay, boomer. And really invoiced for animal research. Oh, guys, they'd always fall back on these horrible experiments on animals. Anytime they could, they'd say, that was an animal. You could have, like, a person's name. You know what I mean? Oh, that was an animal. You named your animal Aunt June. They were silly. They were so silly. Honestly, like, sometimes when you get to reading the congressional record or the deposition type documents, you just want to, I mean, it's so sick, but you want to laugh at how stupid they think you are. Senator Kennedy, and I know you might not like Senator Kennedy, but Senator Kennedy showed Dr. Geschichter the receipts from the files. Yeah, he did that. He slapped the receipts right in front of his face, and Dr. Geschichter claimed the records were false. He said, the quote, "They were trying to make sure in their own records that they had some breakthrough on clinical grounds so that they could put anything clinical they could lay their hands on as a reason for the check. So they put the money on the wrong patient at that time." So, I mean, he was wiggling like an eel to try to get out of the fact that his fund had allegedly paid some cancer patients for these horrible treatments. So, yeah, he was trying to say, oh, it was animals, and then it was like Senator Kennedy gives him slaps the receipts in his face, and then he's like, oh, no, we just essentially saying, we lied in saying we did it on people in order to get it through. That makes no sense, but let's go with it. Some experiments tested in Georgetown were using drugs to promote illogical thinking and impulsiveness to the degree the subject would be discredited in public. This is in the documentation. They wanted to encourage illogical thinking with the idea that they wanted the subject to, say, go around in public and be discredited. Again, behavioral modification and mind control. That's what you can look at all these hundreds of projects under MKUltra's umbrella. But the heart, if you were to tie it all together and say, why did they do this? It's to modify people's behavior to make society do what you wanted them to do, to make people do what you wanted them to do, to make assassins, to make people shut up about the stuff you were doing, to control them. That was why they wanted to do it. The K drug was not mentioned in the 1976 Church Committee's final report because that information had not been released at that time. So by 76, the K drug hadn't even come to public knowledge. We had hearings In 75 and 77, Congressional Senate hearings, subcommittee hearings, all these hearings, but there was also a church committee headed by church, that's why it's called the church committee, in 76, and by that time it hadn't come out, but I think it did come out by 77. Today, as of 2020, and I think the last time I did this research on this was 2019, but most of it was done in 2017 by me. Today, only the detailed reports of the animal studies remain. All the rest of it was shredded, as most, if not all, of the victims of those two sub-projects were terminally ill. No reports of their experiences have surfaced, sadly. In one document, quote, sizable amounts of tick venom. Tick venom! I mean, where are we? Sizable amounts of tick venom was considered in an attempt to cause muscle paralysis. So old Aunt Judy is getting tick venom put into her body to cause muscle paralysis. So then she can't say, hey, what's going on in her last moments? I mean, this is Nazi doctor stuff. This is, hey, we've got a group of guinea pigs. We can do whatever we want to. And we've got the carte blanche from these alphabet agencies to do so. This is sick. When Dr. Gottlieb, again, we've talked about good old Dr. Gottlieb, the LSD Dr. Gottlieb. Let's talk about Dr. Gottlieb. So when Dr. Gottlieb was interviewed about the knockout drugs, because remember, he's also tied in with those safe houses where they wanted to knock out people and bring them in for entrapment. He told horror tales about enemies of the United States allegedly having the ability to render people unconscious. He said this, quote, it is subtle to do this successfully, covertly. Materials have to be in small enough quantities, tasteless, ... But there was some mention in these files that I referred to about a system, a potential enemy use, where they put a sort of a pipe under a door of a sleeping target and ran gas in, which would essentially anesthetize them, ... During this anesthesia, they would come into his room and search it and take his documents and so on. So you're like, what was that you just read? Let me explain it. When Dr. Gottlieb kept getting pulled back and asked questions, and asked specifically, they'd ask him specifically about the safe houses. They'd ask him specifically about Frank Olson, you know. They'd ask him specifics. And when they asked him specifics about the K drugs, when that came out, it's probably 77 without me flipping to my end notes, which I could probably very easily do, but let me just say, it was probably in 77, and he was asked, and he was talking about these noble motives, about these horror tales, about enemies of the United States. You know, we're doing this to protect our own people. We have to know what we're up against. You know, they're knocking us out. We have to know how to knock them out. And, you know, at least we did it on these people. Then he runs off at the mouth about the necessities of covert operations of this case, this dosing, this warfare. And he talks about it. It needs to be in a small quantity. It needs to be tasteless. You know, it needs to be like a pipe under a door of a sleeping target and running gas in and anesthetizing them. And during the anesthesia, you know, having the agents come in the room and search it and take his documents away. This has nothing to do with people on a cancer institute. But, you know, it's just like he's got to make it sound like this. They're on this massive mission. It's like spy games. So there was also a kerfluffle about the Gorman building at Georgetown, wherein the CIA had sponsored $375,000 plus a non-reoccurring grant of $125,000 in 1975 to the university to build a research wing. Yeah, so how best to get your guinea pigs from Georgetown than to put them in the Gorman building where you have your own little place, your own little setup away from everybody else. On August 18, 1977, the Washington Post reported, quote, a long description of the proposed Georgetown facility suggested that the human patients and volunteers would be available for experimental purposes. It is said the agency could recruit new scientific personnel at the medical center because agents working undercover there would be in daily contact with the graduate school. I'm going to do a whole entire video of the schools associated with the CIA MKUltra projects. Some of the schools, when called out and when documentation was shown, admitted and apologized for their participation in these projects. Unwitting and unwilling. Not unwilling, but unwitting. They would claim they didn't have knowledge of the real reason. Some didn't respond at all, and some denied it. Flat out denied it, even though they had proof. They had the financial documents and some proof. And even some of the doctors saying, yeah, I went there, da-da-da-da, and they just said they're liars. Or they just denied it. The CIA's interest in this Gorman building at Georgetown was to have the equivalent of a hospital safe house. 1/6 of the space for covert testing of some gruesome experiments with 3 chemical division employees. Remember, we were talking about the different employees that would have on these LSD teams and people that were already trained, I guess what you would call it, to be dealing with this chemical, the different chemicals. So they would have 3 of these folks stationed from the CIA working as doctors there, doubling as doctors there. Again, they would have to run the ethics of these people. You have to make sure they're perfect candidates for these kind of Nazi-like experiments. That wing of the building did contain a radioisotope lab and equipment. Dr. Geschichter claimed that the money was given by the CIA with no strings attached. He stated, quote, "I knew nothing about this. Neither did Georgetown." Yeah, right. Dr. Geschichter seemed taken aback by the Gorman building's proposed experiments and said, quote, "What has gone on in that memorandum would scare anybody." You darn right. So not only was he saying he knew nothing about it, he was like even admitting how horrible some of these proposed researches would go on in this Gorman building had it gone to its fruition. Dr. Matthew McNulty, he was the university official at Georgetown once this stuff was breaking, and you have to understand this was after the fact. He told ABC News that he found it, quote, "despicable in a democracy for an institution to be involved with the CIA and not be asked first." Wouldn't you think? In being questioned as to why in the world the CIA would be interested in anti-cancer research, Dr. Charles Geschichter responded, quote, "I can only give you the report that came to me from Alan Dulles, and I will quote it." Oh, please quote it. "Thank God there's something decent coming out of our bag of dirty tricks." So Alan Dulles was pleased that these kind of projects were going on because they knew they had a bag of dirty tricks, and thank God something darn good was finally coming out of their dirty tricks. So Geschichter was kind of proud. Like, I want to stress to you that these doctors didn't come to these subcommittees with their heads hanging low, crying about what they did. Sometimes they were rather darn proud. And if something was really heinous, they just said they didn't know. They would say they were unknowing of said research. Senator Kennedy pressed the issue and kept asking what the connection was between high blood pressure, arthritis, cancer, and national security covert intelligence. And at some point through this whole thing, wouldn't you just want to stand up and say, "Wait a minute, Dr. Geschichter. Wait a minute, representative from Georgetown. Wait a minute, CIA." I don't think they called I don't remember who they called from the CIA, but let's just say you get these people and say, your purview for the CIA is overseas. It's not anything here at the mainland. Why the hell do you give 2 wet farts about what goes on at Georgetown with the cancer patients? The thing is they're going to stop and go, what excuse do you come up with? You know that the reason you use them is because they were good guinea pigs for you. So Dr. Geschichter responds. You gotta love this. The cheek. Dr. Geschichter points to one unexplainable project and said, quote, "I can just quote you a $32,000 grant to another institution to synthesize a drug that was in French pharmacopoeia, and I bought it for $200 a pound." And what does that have to do with anything? So he's trying to say, yeah, I can quote you a $32,000 grant. You know why you can? Is because that's one of the documents that wasn't shredded, and now you're clinging on to that one document that was giving to another financial institution to synthesize a drug that was in French pharmacopoeia. Oh, okay, that explains everything. I mean, you just want to go, this is just insanity. When asked about the Georgetown building, Admiral Stansfield Turner, again, at that time he was the acting director of the CIA, he said, quote, "I cannot imagine any official of this government giving away $335,000 and not asking for something in return. The CIA is not a Social Security agency. They are not into giving away money for no reason. And if you think they are, I have a nice swamp to sell you that you can build, a resort on." Even the CIA, when he was trying to dig into it, this director was just like gobsmacked about what he was seeing in the files. So Senator Schweiker chimes in frustration. "Here we are, fumbling and stumbling around, trying to ascertain what went on and who's responsible. One of the key aims of this project was deniability." It worked. Senator Schweiker, it worked. The deniability factor, the compartmentalization factor, the shredding factor, it worked. People still to this day don't know what all happened. We don't know how Aunt June, who went out on a psychosis trip, on her last stage cancer treatment, we don't know how she fared. We don't know. Because even though the financial records show that some people were paid, we don't know who they were. Yeah, because there was a cutout agency involved. So, long story short, let's not use American citizens or actually citizens of the world as guinea pigs for our behavior modification studies. Let's not use them for mind control. Let's not use them without their consent. Let's respect the human person. No human is more important than another human. And I think if you think so, it's just keeping an us and them mentality going. So I hope you were enlightened to some extent about this sub-project of MKUltra dealing with end-stage patients that were tested on, and the K drug, the knockout drug, and Georgetown University. Georgetown, I don't mean to slam them. They were by far not the only one of the universities that had testing going on, and not always did the higher ups at the university say, like the university president, a lot of times they didn't know. It was the CIA got doctors in there and they were willing to do the experiment. So I don't mean to besmirch Georgetown in any way, shape, or form. I'll get to the specific universities and what they admitted to knowing in another video. So I'm just going to let you know that this kind of stuff went on and it doesn't ever need to happen again. So if you were enlightened a little bit about this video, please push that like button and ring that subscribe bell. And the next time I upload another video, you'll simply be notified. And I hope you have an excellent day. Take care. Bye.